Thanks, Mia, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us for this Damp and Mould Action and Awareness Week webinar on emerging legislation. I've also got with me Tony Boyle, the Regional Director for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, and he's going to be talking to us a bit later on about the legislation that's coming out in those devolved nations as well. First, we're going to look at the existing legislation, though. We want to look at what already exists and what's already enforced, and then we're going to focus on that latest and emerging stuff. And then later we'll look at common themes that we've identified across all of these pieces of legislation. And then finally, we're going to take a look at how Aico can help you with staying compliant. So on that existing legislation, I think it's always important to remember what is already there. And first and foremost is probably the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, HHSRS. There is a second version, a reviewed version that we believe is close to being finished and being finalised. I think it probably got entangled with the general election this year, so that's why it hasn't already been released. But as it stands, we've got that version 1 that is very much enforced and in power. We've also got the Decent Home Standard that was obviously last updated in June 2006, and then finally we've got the Homes Fitness for Human Habitation Act that was released in 2018, and that one replaced the Landlord and Tenant Act from 1985. And then the more recent stuff. And the stuff that is coming out soon. So we've got the Social Housing Regulation Act, that's from 2023, and that paved the way for and gave the regulator of social housing the power to produce the Consumer Standards Code of Practice, which they did so in April of this year. And then from that as well, we had the consultation that's now closed on AWAB's law that was focused on the timelines for repairs in the social rented sector. AWAB's law had 7 key proposals within it, and we've boiled those down into those 4 key points that you can see on screen now. But just to look at each of those 7 proposals in a quick format, the first one talks about investigating potential hazards within 14 calendar days. And then within the same 14 calendar days and within 48 hours of the investigation, Proposal 2 states that you've got to provide a written summary of those findings to the resident, including a timeline for repair and a schedule of works. Proposal 3 states that if a hazard is found to pose a significant risk to the health or safety of the resident, then repair works must begin within 7 calendar days of that written summary being issued. And then repair works must also be completed within a reasonable time period, which is Proposal 4, and the consideration of the resident's needs to be accounted for too. Proposal 5 states that emergency repairs must take place as soon as possible and in any event within 24 hours, so really quite stringent timelines on that one. And then Proposal 6 states that where a hazard with significant risk is found and the property cannot be made safe within the above timescales, then suitable alternative accommodation must be arranged for the occupants. Records of all attempts to comply with the proposals must be kept, and this is Proposal 7, the final proposal, and it includes records of all correspondence with the residents and any contractors that have done any work on the case as well. So now we'll just take a quick look at the devolved nations and what's going on there. Tony, over to you.
Perfect, thank you, Jordan. Yeah, just on to the devolved nation side of things, a lot of interesting developments certainly happening in England, and England seem to be leading the way in terms of dealing with the issue. So we'll take a wee look firstly at Wales. So in Wales, we've got the Welsh Housing Quality Standard, and as Jordan touched on earlier, the HHSRS applies, that document that Jordan mentioned earlier, the Housing Health and Safety Rating Scheme, that applies in Wales, and it is mentioned in the WHQS. In Northern Ireland, we have the NI Housing Fitness Standard, and that makes reference, that particular document makes reference to dampness. So it says that properties should be free from dampness, prejudicial to the health of the occupants. And in Northern Ireland, there is also calls to introduce the HHSRS there as well. So we may see some sort of interesting developments on the horizon with regards to Wales and Northern Ireland. I suppose there has been a bit of activity in Scotland in recent weeks and months. Interesting stuff. So on the 16th of September 2024, the SHR, that is the Scottish Housing Regulator, introduced a consultation document with proposed specific indicators in relation to tenant and resident safety. And those look at the appropriate monitoring of the effectiveness of landlords and their approach to managing reports and instances of damp and mould. So the housing regulator is inviting and collecting views on the topic, and those views that are flagged and come into the regulator will help shape the ARC indicators. So the ARC is the annual return charter. So the form or the document which landlords have to complete annually, and it really does measure how the landlord is getting on in terms of compliance. Just on the damp and mould, obviously the prominent issue here, I just want to quickly mention that the proposed indicators, there are a couple of new ones that are going to be measured as well in this consultation. One in relation to electrical safety. And our property has been tested every 5 years in their electrical installation condition report. So that's going to be measured, or it looks as though it will be. And fire safety as well. We've obviously seen a lot of developments, you know, the introduction of the Scottish Tolerable Standard and the terminology LD2, you know, as a property up to a certain level, and when it comes to fire safety. So that's going to be another interesting one to keep an eye on landlords, for landlords, because they will, it looks as though they will be asked to report on, you know, how many properties aren't up to that standard, after we've seen that big push in terms of the legislative changes. Yeah, back to damp and mould then, obviously the topic of conversation. So we're looking at 3 proposed new indicators on the ARC for damp and mould, and they'll be looking at the average length of time taken to resolve cases of damp and mould, the percentage of resolved cases when it comes to damp and mould, and if those cases were actually reopened as well. And the other one would be the number of open cases of damp and mould at year end. So some interesting stuff happening. As I said, the Scottish Housing Regulator aimed to confirm the revised ARC indicators by January 2025. So very, very soon. And those ARC indicators would be in place for the collection year 2025 to 2026. So it looks as though there's a lot of activity happening, particularly in Scotland, which is nice to see, and definitely one to keep an eye on. So if you would like to contribute to that consultation, please have a look at the Scottish Housing Regulator website. Whether you're a resident or a landlord, your views and opinions would be welcomed by the regulator, and help shape what the annual return charter will look like in the future. So thank you very much for that, and I will pass back to Jordan.
Nice one. Thank you very much, Tony. That's great. Okay, so what we've then done is taken all of that legislation and all of the interesting bits and pieces that are coming out across the country, and we've managed to identify what we believe are 5 key common themes across it all. Identify, manage, analyze, record, and communicate. And we'll just take a quick look at each of those in turn. So identify is being able to identify cases in a timely, scalable, and reliable format. There's obviously lots of talk about across the legislation about, you know, doing things in a certain amount of time and recording when things are started and closed, as Tony mentioned there in the Scottish legislation as well. There's manage, which is managing cases effectively through effective work and task management. There is analysing, so that's analysing any and all data, whether it be quantitative or qualitative, from a property to determine the right fix for that issue. And then there's recording, so that proposal 7 that I mentioned from Awaab's Law, and about recording every action that is taken to try and resolve a damp and mould issue, whether it be investigations, imagery, reports, interventions, resident actions, and making sure that you've got a comprehensive case history for every damp and mould case that you have. And then finally, communicate. It's pretty self-explanatory, but again, that proposal 2 that I mentioned about 48 hours to get a report from an investigation to the resident in is obviously really quite stringent with that timeline. So having that ability to communicate with residents in a timely and transparent way is really important, and doing so to get that information to them as quickly as possible. So yeah, we've got those 5 key common themes, and where we believe Aico can help you staying compliant with this new legislation is by introducing a new section on our portal called Homelink Case Management. And home link case management is a tool that's going to provide you with the ability to identify issues, manage cases, analyze causes, record case history, and communicate with residents. Really exciting stuff coming up on this, and let's go and take a look at it now. Okay, so I've flicked over to the Homelink portal, which hopefully some of you may well recognize. What you may not recognize is the new top right button that we have here, Create Case, and the section down here we have on the navigation bar that's called Case, and within that, Case Overview. Case Overview is essentially where we are looking to provide the case management tools that you need to manage a case from identification through to resolution for a particular case of mould. So front and center, first thing that you see when you load up the new area is going to be this task list. Now, the idea of the task list is to help you identify tasks that you have previously entered into the system that are due either yesterday, today, or imminently. Now, as you can see here, we've got a task that is a week overdue now, and that's marked in red. And you can see that we've also got tasks that are due today are also marked in red, just to highlight that they are, that they are due very soon or are overdue and therefore need to be actioned as soon as possible. We also provide a case priority score, the address that the case is associated to, and then an assignee for the particular task as well. If I flick over to the case list, and I'll just expand it as well, what you can see here is that we have a priority score for each of the cases. Again, we've got the damp and mold risk score, which is the insight score that you may well know from the previous or the current version of the portal. And we've also provided the date created for this particular case. Now, obviously, as we've been talking about within AWAB's law, there are a lot of time restrictions and requirements. So having the date created is really important because obviously it means that you can see how long it's been since the case was created and therefore where it should be in the sort of lifespan of that case. You can also see the name of the assignee for this particular case, and we've also got a shortcut to get to the analysis view, but I'll come back to that later. As we go back to the case overview page, what you'll see on the right-hand side is the damp and mold score across all properties graph. Now, if I just highlight one particular series on this for now, we've got the UK average damp and mold risk. Now, this is utilising the fact that Aico has probably the biggest data set from social housing across the UK, and that allows us to give you a really good understanding as to what the rest of the country is doing, what the standard sort of typical situation is for properties across the country. It also allows you to compare your portfolio, so every property that you have connected, every property that has environmental sensors within it, will contribute to your portfolio average. So you can get a feeling as to where your portfolio sits compared to the UK average and how it's changing over time compared to the UK as well. And then finally, at the bottom here, we've got a set of metrics. So cases opened, cases closed, and the number of proactive cases that have been opened as well. Now, as Tony was talking about that ARC that the Scottish Housing Regulator requires to be submitted every year, one of the new suggestions for that is the number of cases opened within a 12-month period and the number of cases closed. So having that data right there available to you is really vital and really valuable as well. So the next thing we'll do is have a look at how to create a case. So the first thing that we want to do when we're creating a new case is identify the property with which it wants to be associated to. And what we can now do is add a brand new property to our system that doesn't have any presence in our platform whatsoever up till now. So even if there's not a SmartLink gateway or environmental sensors installed within a property, you are able to manage a case of mould within it from identification through to resolution, rather than having to have different systems and identify and manage some cases on one system and manage other cases on ours. It's really important to be able to do that all in one place as part of that proposal 7 within AWAB's law around record keeping and maintaining decent records of what you're doing to stay compliant with the legislation. So what we could do here, for example, is if I were to search for the Aico office up in Oswestry, we'd be able to identify the office really easily and then add that property to our system just by hitting next, selecting the dwelling type and then hitting save. I'm not going to do that now. What I will do instead, though, is I will use that property because it does already exist in our system. And I will just do a quick search for the postcode, which will bring it up nice and easy. I can then select that property, and that's now the property that's going to have a case created against it. Now we've just got some basic information to enter. So at the minute, we've only got one case type, which is damp and mould. There is speculation that AWAB's law is going to apply, or the legislation does allow for AWAB's law to apply to all the hazards that are identified within HHSRS. But obviously, damp and mould is where the focus is at the moment, and that's where we have turned our focus as well. We can select a start date from a date picker so that you can accurately record when a case was created. You can assign a user, so this would be the individual that you wish to be looking after this particular case from start to finish. And you can identify why a case was opened as well. So a really important part of legislation is the fact that as soon as anyone that is considered a representative of you as a landlord is in a property and is in a position to notice mould, then you as the landlord are considered aware. So, for example, if an electrician is fixing a light fitting in the bathroom and there is a small patch of mould in the corner of the room, you are most likely going to be considered aware of that mould issue from that point onwards. You may not have had a report from the resident about it, but you are considered aware, and therefore you may want to start a case, and we'll call that a proactive case. You're able to upload files. So say that electrician also took a photo of the mould while he was there, you'd be able to upload that photo or any other PDFs, images that you wish to attach to this initial case opening. And then when you hit continue, we are offered three more things to enter in. So we've got the damp and mould severity score, which is a 0 to 5 score, where 5 is the highest and the worst. So you can see here our tooltip there says critical, damp in over 60% of the room. It's very just an example as to what 5 might represent to you, but it's just a steer just so you understand what we're trying to capture. And then the resident health risk is looking at the vulnerabilities of the residents within a home. So we know that mould has higher consequences for the elderly and for the very young, and also anybody that has respiratory illnesses, COPD, for example. So we want to capture that resident health risk as well while we're here. And those two things go towards what we're calling the priority score. The Ombudsman talks about risk-based prioritization and therefore tackling cases in such a way that the cases with that highest priority are tackled soonest and sorted quickest. So therefore, we're using these two things to try and set and help identify those properties that should be tackled first. We then ask for a case description just to capture what information you know about the case already, who identified the issue, and why you've given it the scores that you have. When you hit create case, that will take you directly to the case view for that particular case. So you can see here we have the property information that's already in our system transferred to the new case. We've got a timeline here, and you can see that new case open status from today that is just always captured. So you're already starting to comply with that proposal 7 and keeping your records straight all the time. And then on the right-hand side here, you can see we've got the priority score that we captured during that case creation. We've got the ability to close the case as well. And then in here, you will see that because this property doesn't have any sensors installed, there's no sensors commissioned within it. These widgets stay fairly blank. There's no sensors installed, and we don't have a damp and mould score or a heat loss score for them. We do have the ability to invite the resident to join the HomeLink app for residents as well from here. So you can see if I click create account, it automatically brings up the information here that we need to create them account. That would trigger the email to go to them and invite them to download the app and then verify themselves and get working on the app. And that'll have some additional benefits that I'll come back to in a little bit. We've got this brand new graph as well down here. So you'll see that these two data sets are the same data sets that we saw on the overview. But I should say that these graphs are now much more flexible and intuitive and hopefully interactive as well. So you can zoom in and you can zoom out and you can click and drag to get really, get to depths with the data. And the tooltip gives you the actual value for each of the data series as well over time. So you can see how things are changing and when things are moving. So I've now just flicked over to an existing case that's got a bit more information captured against it. It's got a lot more information and interventions that have already been applied to the timeline, and it will just give you a bit more of a feeling as to what a case will look like as it progresses. So you can see this particular property does have sensors, and therefore we have these widgets that have now got values in, and you can see how the current score compares to when the case was started. And you can also see that because this account, this particular case has a resident account associated with it, this widget has also got a bit more life to it. And I can actually view the milestones, which allows you to understand when a resident was invited to the app, and then when they log in for the first time, and the date that that happened, when they verified themselves, and when they completed the first survey. Now, surveys are a really powerful feature that we've added, and they're going to allow residents to do things like take photos of any mold, any ventilation, and upload that to the system so that it actually appears in the timeline as well. You can see here we've got the button to view the survey results once they've completed a survey, and we've also got a specific damp and mold survey that is going to be available that allows them to answer questions about the mold, whether it's changed, how long it's been around for, and again, take photos so that you've got up-to-date information about what's going on within a property. There's also some tasks against this. So we've stated that this particular case has been open for nearly a year. So our next task that is due is going to be in a couple of days, and it's the 1-year review, and it's to check in with the residents, confirm if this case can be closed. The idea is that our system is really flexible and can be used to match whatever your process within your organisation is. So we know that some landlords have a process of not closing a case for 12 months after it started, at least, so that a property has a chance to go through all of the seasons before you decide that it is the issue is rectified completely. If we have a look down this timeline, you can see all the various types of thing that we can capture. So information posts, intervention posts that have got a flag against them. And then if I show you the add something new to the timeline, you'll see that all of the various options that we have. So as I said, we have interventions. These are something that you've done within a property that you're hoping will have a material impact on the structure, on the building, on the issue itself. So it could be that you're installing insulation. It could be that you're changing the ventilation. It could be that you are providing new information to the resident to allow them to understand how to use certain aspects of the home, whether it be an MVHR that the resident isn't using. It isn't used to using and therefore needs some guidance on how to use it more effectively, or even utilizing the resident app to provide and get access to the recommendations and the advice on there that can help with rectifying an issue with mold. You can add a task, as I've already shown, and this is so that you can select a date in the future that a task needs to be completed by, so that you can't have a situation where a case falls through the cracks and gets forgotten about or missed. And you can also see that we can configure email notifications so that you get a reminder on the day that a task has been set to be due, so that, again, even if you've not logged into our system, you are reminded about it via email. We've got information, which is, it could be an update about the case. It could be uploading a survey report or any other PDF or images that you have that have been made available to you. And finally, we've got no access, and that's capturing a situation where a resident wasn't at home for a scheduled visit, or for some other reason wasn't able to provide access, and you can record that. So that you've got that should a case progress and end up going to court or going to the ombudsman, etc. You have that information about what you have done to try and stay compliant with the proposals. You can also see that all of those interventions, so you can see the interventions on the timeline, are also plotted on the graph here. So you can see this particular property had quite a high. It was in the medium range for the damp and mold. If I remove the other two data fields, that just shows you the property maximum damp and mold risk. And you can see we've configured a bunch of interventions here that were aiming to help. So you can see dehumidifiers were installed, and you can see that the risk drops off after that point. And then we said that a repair of the render for the external wall took place, and that has further dropped the damp and mold risk score. The dehumidifiers was collected, so they were reacquired by the landlord because they weren't seen as being needed anymore, and that subsequently led to an increase in the damp and mold risk score. But then some additional ventilation was installed within the kitchen, and we can see that the score then dropped off again. Now we can see that actually, as we've progressed further into the year, that mold score has actually risen again. So that might indicate that the landlord needs to get in touch with the resident and understand what's happened or what's changed, or commission a new inspection, to complete a new survey report to understand, again, if there's anything additional that needs doing to stay compliant with those proposals within AWAB's law. What we can also do to jump into the data even further and get a bit more information out of the system is we can use analysis view. Now, this analysis view, again, utilizes our new graphs, so you can zoom in and you can pan along the data to understand what's going on. And you can see here we've got each individual room damp and mold risk score. So for the bathroom, the kitchen, and the living room, all separately set out. You can see on the right-hand side here, we have 5 separate graphs that you can utilize. So we've got the damp and mold inside risk scores, where I am now, but we've also got the ability for the first time to overlay temperature, humidity, and CO2, which are the 3 environmental bits of data that we collect from our EI 1020 or EI 1025. You can see that we've got the ability to turn on different bits of data. So if I want to look at the bathroom downstairs, this information is all available, and I can just click and select which data series I want to look at to understand what's going on in a particular room. You can also see that those interventions are available on all of these graphs, so that you can understand exactly what impact different interventions may well have had. And if there's too many or they're a bit overwhelming, you're kind of trying to see a specific set of data, then you can turn off those interventions as well, just to make sure that you can see exactly what you need to see. We've also got the ability to look at damp and mold risk components. Now, this is the radar plot that you may well know, the damp and mold risk components graph that is elsewhere on the portal already. But rather than showing it in that radar form, we've currently got it as a time series, so that you can see how those different components, how the structural and environmental components are varying over time. You can see that we've separated those out with solid line versus a dash line in the key down here. And then that will hopefully be really valuable to understand exactly what the root cause of a mold issue is, and really get into the data and have a look as to what's changing and what impact any interventions that you make are having over this data. And hopefully that's gonna allow you to understand exactly what you need to do to hopefully reduce and resolve an issue with mold. What you can also do is actually now select a specific date range that you wish to look at. So, for example, if I just want to look at data from the first week of September, I can now select that date range, and that will load the data accordingly. So now you can see that I'm just looking at that first week of September. And when I flick back to any of the other graphs, you'll see that the date range is kept. So as you flick between these graphs, that date range doesn't change, so that you can really easily compare different bits and pieces to one another should you need to. I mentioned earlier about being able to have that clear communication with residents being really vital. So one of the aspects to that is updating the HomeLink app to provide some of that functionality. So if I go here, this is going to be the new version of the HomeLink app. This particular scenario is when there is no devices installed within a home. You can go to the notification section, and you'll be able to see in here that there is a survey to complete, and there is new information that a landlord has shared with this particular resident. So if the resident chooses to complete the survey, they can do so and go into here to do that. Or they can go to the notifications and they can look at the information that has been shared with them. And you can see that it can include images, it can include text, and it can include PDFs as well. So that information is all there available for the resident. So that's going to really help with that proposal 2, for example, where you have to get the results of an inspection to a resident within 48 hours of that inspection being completed. And then the final thing to show you is the case report. So what the case report is an export from the timeline that allows you to export a PDF download from the portal with everything that you've captured on the timeline for a particular case within that PDF. Now, this is obviously really valuable for sharing this case or the information around this case to different people. It could be that it needs to go to some solicitors if a case has gone to court and you want to provide all the information under that proposal 7 around recording everything that you've done towards a case of damp and mold. Or it could be to anybody that's within the organisation that doesn't have access to the HomeLink portal and just wants to see what the latest information for a particular case is. And this export will capture images, it will capture all the information updates, all the interventions that have been completed, and record any no accesses that have occurred. So you've got all the information there that you may need to helpfully get the information across to that individual who wants to know what the latest is with a particular case. And that brings me to the end of the demo of HomeLink Case Management. Hopefully you can see how the various features and ideas that we've developed are really going to help with keeping you compliant with the various requirements from those new pieces of legislation that we looked at the start of the webinar. Mia, back over to you.